Welcome to Sunflower Movement. I'm your host, Ashley Buckner. Quick disclaimer before we get started. This podcast is for education and entertainment purposes only. This platform is not a form of psychotherapy, counseling, or healthcare of any kind. Sunflowers bloom in the most unexpected places, always adjusting to stay connected to the sun. I see these sunflower movements as the moments, people, and places where we feel seen, heard, and believed, where healing takes root and transformation begins. If you're seeking that kind of space, you're in the right place. I'm all about being low maintenance to be a high maintenance girly, and my heatless curler from Cozy Confidence makes it so easy. I've tried satin curlers before, but they always made my curls too tight. I love the texture of this one. It gives my hair extra body without feeling overdone. I just sleep in it overnight, brush it out in the morning, add some dry shampoo at the roots if needed, and a little oil on the ends for shine. It makes my morning routine so much easier. If you want to simplify your getting ready routine, Cozy Confidence has you covered. Use my code AshleyB at cozyconfidence.com for 10% off anytime. Your hair will thank you. If you've ever dealt with sore muscles, tension, or just need a moment to reset, you need to try Pronomat. I won't lie, it's a little spendy, but I use mine every single day and it's 100% worth it. Whether I'm winding down, releasing tension, or even working on muscle tone, it makes a huge difference. I lay on it in so many different positions and every time I feel the impact. If you've been thinking about it, now's the time to try it. Use my code AshleyB for 10% off at pronomat.com. Your body will thank you. I've been using this supplement for the past year and I'm not stopping anytime soon. Let's talk about Armra Colostrum. I love it for the immune-boosting benefits, workout recovery, and even the strength it's given to my hair. It's become a staple in my routine, and I can genuinely feel the difference. If you're looking for an easy way to support your body from the inside out, this is it. Head to tryarmra.com/Ashley Buckner and use code Ashley Buckner for 15% off. Give it a try. You'll see why I'm hooked. Hi, welcome back, everyone. I am so very excited for this conversation. I am here with Dr. Laura Anderson. She is a licensed psychotherapist who specializes in religious trauma. Many of you have probably read her book, When Religion Hurts You. We have a lot of submissions from the audience today, and we're just going to talk about all things religious trauma. I'm going to pick Dr. Laura Anderson's brain. I just cannot wait for this conversation, you guys. Welcome, Laura.
Hello, it's so good to be here. I'm so glad we finally got to do this. It feels like it's been a long time coming.
A long time coming. I have been tuning into your Instagram since I kind of, even before I would say my Instagram kind of went a little crazy because I was just learning so much about religious trauma, which is such an interesting thing for me to say because I feel very well versed in it, but it's different, right? Like I have this inside out perspective of learning it through my own nervous system and the nervous system of my clients. But then you almost need sometimes external information to understand everything.
Yes, I very much agree. It's because it's a validating thing, especially if you grew up in systems like this. It's like you can see it in other people, but it's very hard to see things in yourself sometimes. Or we're really prone to being like, oh, it wasn't so bad for me. It was really bad for you, even though we might have gone through the exact same thing. But it's really hard to kind of validate that within ourselves. So I think sometimes having external places that are like, no, this is actually like pretty bad or abusive, or this can lead to trauma. It's like, think you're giving the internal experience some words that can then, be externally transformative.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm really curious, what kind of inspired you to write When Religion Hurts You?
Yeah, so a few different things. I actually used a lot of the research from my doctoral dissertation. My dissertation wasn't on religious trauma generally. It was on sexualized violence, or healing from sexualized violence, which included from purity culture. And so I was able to use the research and kind of bring it over. But in terms of why I wrote the book, not only was that research really helpful, but also my own personal experiences are inside of high control religion. I work with so many clients who this is their story as well. And there wasn't anything like this resource because prior to probably 2016, 17, most of the leading voices in post-religious spaces were saying, you need to leave religion, you need to become an atheist, and then you're going to be fine. And it wasn't addressing the embodied component of what trauma actually is, through that physiological lens. And so I wanted to create something that people could have a resource for to kind of validate their experiences, understand what was happening, and give support, especially because not everybody can, afford therapy or coaching or support like that. And not every therapist knows about this. Not every counselor is versed even in trauma, let alone religious trauma. So I wanted it to just be kind of like I mean, like body keeps the score is kind of like the seminal work for the trauma world. I wanted this to be something foundational in the religious trauma space that people could use and build on and take even further.
Yeah, it is such a well-informed book. And for listeners, just in case anyone doesn't know maybe the high control religion you were raised in, are you okay speaking to that?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in a high control religion. The denomination, it's funny, there was the word free in it. It's anything but free. It's called Evangelical Free Church. And the way that I describe it to people, it's actually quite similar to the LDS Church. And I'll tell you a funny anecdote in a second. But so inside of some of the Christian denominations, there's the Church of Christ, Southern Baptist, Lutheranism. Anyways, so I describe the Evangelical Free Church as kind of this hellfire brimstone of the Southern Baptist Church. It's kind of this rigidity of the Church of Christ. So just a lot of really dry rules and like a lot of, consequences and a lot of dictation of like, this is what life is supposed to be. And then kind of that stoicism of Lutheranism. So just non-emotional, things like that. And then it was all wrapped up in what's called Reformed theology, which again, many, many similarities between the LDS Church and how I grew up. But it's this idea of you're predestined. Some people are chosen, some people are not. Eternal security. But within that, so many works that you have to, even if you're predestined and chosen, you still have to like do all this stuff to really work out your salvation. So kind of a dumpster fire. That's usually the better way to describe it. But, I don't want to be offensive to your audience. I grew up being taught that being in the LDS Church was a cult. Like, just like Jehovah's Witnesses were in a cult, Islam folks were a cult. And I went to, and this is maybe a bad example, but I went to the Book of Mormon on Broadway,
Yes.
which of course is hilarious. And I know that there's exaggeration and everything. But I was like, oh my gosh, I grew up believing every single one of these things. So if that's a cult, then I was in a cult. And I know I don't always use that word to describe.
Same.
It's different than high control religion. But given just the framework that I had come out of, I was like, hold on a second here. Like this is literally the same thing. And so I've got to evaluate kind of what's going on here.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I've seen the Book of Mormon a couple times, and both times like post, obviously, being a member of the church. And my aunt, she's actually a spiritual director. She was never a Mormon, but we talk about the Book of Mormon kind of making fun of all religions in a way.
Yes.
Right?
It
because
does.
It is pretty far-fetched. And I do love that play. It is
so good.
especially if you really understand the inner workings of how high control religion works. It's hilarious. I love that you've seen that. I feel like the audience is going to love that you've seen that. I have to tell you, so I actually, and I shared this before we were recording, I read your book to just better be able to define religious trauma and to talk about it with my clients. And I didn't really read it for my own self, because I was like, oh, I've deconstructed religion. Like, come on, So I have to tell you, I remember I was on a walk and I was listening to it. And it's later in the book when you talk about purity culture and your line, it was like, purity culture is a form of sexual abuse. And when I tell you, I like stopped on my walk and I was like, whoa. Yeah. And I had just never thought about purity culture in that way. I mean, it gives me chills to this day to think about, but and how much that spoke to me on like a very personal level.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, and this is my question before we get to questions from the audience, but what allowed you to get to that place to be able to identify it in that way? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I remember a long time ago, actually, like in church, like in a sermon that I was hearing, somebody defined abuse as the misuse of something for its intended purpose. And I think that there's a lot of other ways that abuse can be defined, but I really appreciated that. So it's like physical abuse is using your body for an unintended purpose in a way to harm another person, or verbal abuse, same thing with words, to harm another person. Like that's what our words should not be used for, or our body should not be used to harm other people. And so I remember, with sexual abuse, it's using sexualized rhetoric, actions, experiences, not for their intended purpose, which is connection and pleasure and passion and just like a vibrant connection to self. And so I had always kind of been like having that in the background. And then as I started digging more into purity culture teaching, so I grew up in all of it. I grew up in the 90s. Um, and I know that different denominations and religions are a little bit different, but in evangelicalism, we had what was called true love waits. And so you're signing your virginity pledge
Mm.
card and all this stuff and then I went, of course, like the extra mile. I'm like, I'm not even going to kiss anybody until I'm married. And like fully intended on keeping that, promise. And so when I got out of it, I actually hadn't I'm trying to think. I had kind of been like slowly peeling back some layers. I had my first sexual experience at almost 30 years old. I felt zero guilt and shame, which was really hard for me to accept because I'd been told you're going to feel guilt and shame if you engage in, any kind of activity or whatever outside of this type of marriage. And when I didn't, I had to start kind of looking at, well, what were we actually taught? And that was back in a time, 13, 15 years ago, where we didn't have the resources or even the language that we have today. And finally, in 2015, there was this book that came out called Damaged Goods by someone named Diana Anderson. And they started putting some language to what are these teachings in purity culture and why might they be harmful. And that's where I started to recognize, like, oh, this is fitting that definition of
Mhm.
abuse, of like, teaching people things about their body and their sexuality and how to relate to people. And like, that's not how our bodies should be talked about. That's not how we should have to be required to interact with people. Like, this is abusive. And not to mention, we also know, and there's research that's coming out about it, is that people that have been in purity culture oftentimes demonstrate or example the same symptoms as individuals who have gone through sexualized violence, physical acts of sexualized violence. And that's not to equate one to the other. Like, if this is, you
Yeah.
will absolutely, if you went through purity culture, you will have these symptoms or anything like that. But it is this recognition of like, wow, we need to really take a look at this. Sexualized violence is one of the areas in the trauma world that we have the most research around, and understanding the symptoms and treatments and things like that. And so when we go like, hey, here's this entity where people are coming out of it with the same exact symptoms and treatment needs, like, we need to start looking at that. So yeah, that's kind of a long-winded way of like, that's how I got to, kind of this idea
Yeah.
of like, purity culture is a form of sexual abuse. It's not the same as sexual assault. Sexual assault is a very specific act that happens that is under the umbrella of sexual abuse. But purity culture, I believe, also falls under that umbrella.
Absolutely. It spoke to me very much personally in that
Yeah.
moment. I think it was like the first time that I have done a lot of my own inner work and like worked through a lot of my
Mhm.
own traumas, but it was the first time I was like, "Oh my gosh, everything actually makes sense now." Like as
Mm.
soon as I
Yeah.
read that or heard you say that, because I was listening to the book,
Mhm.
it all just made sense of how I understood my sexuality from the time I was like very
Yeah.
young, and,
Mhm.
and until that moment.
Mhm.
And yeah, it was powerful. It was a powerful
Mhm.
thing, and so I've since been able to talk with a lot of clients about it as well, and I think within Mormonism, you're taught not to have sex, until you're
Yes.
married, and if you
Mhm.
have sex before marriage, a lot of times it's equated to be a worse sin, like the worst sin you could
Yes.
commit,
Yeah. Mhm.
um, and so what I've noticed for a lot of women is, many of them, like, they repress, obviously, they don't have sex,
Mhm.
and then your body essentially kind of learns that, right? Your nervous system
Yes.
remembers that sex is shameful, and then they have
Mhm.
their wedding night,
Mhm.
and
And
then it
yes.
results in an assault, essentially.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
really heartbreaking, and I think the only way to understand that is to understand the, like, the early
Yeah.
programming and
Yeah.
purity culture.
Yeah, I give this example in the book, but I found it to be something that a lot of people have gravitated towards. When we look at our sexuality as an individual, as humans, like our sexuality is present from the moment that we're born to the moment that we die. Sexuality is so much more than who you are kind of bumping genitals with. Like that's an act of sex, right? But that's not
Yeah.
your entire sexuality. But part of our sexuality is getting in touch with our bodies and being able to connect with other people. That starts from the moment we're born. And so there's a natural sexual development process that individuals should be able to go through, and it's congruent with where they're at chronologically and developmentally. And I look at it like a dimmer switch on a light. We've got like the on and off switches, to turn a light on, or we have those like dimmer switch lights. And I look at sexuality as that, where we're slowly turning it on as we grow and develop. And what happens is that when we are taught these messages of your body is bad, sex is dirty and evil, except for this specific context, that dimmer switch is actually it's on off, right? And so then you get to your wedding night, and we're now that there's like a legal piece of paper that has been signed and you've said the right words, to be able to go through this ceremony. Now everything that you've been taught is bad, sinful, and shameful is good. And so instead of that dimmer switch, it's like the on off light switch. And
Mhm.
that is very jarring to your body. Your body isn't able to go just like, oh, well, this was literally wrong and sinful 5 minutes ago, but now it's not, right? And so that really can have that physiological impact where we start to see a lot of sexual pain, sexual dysfunction, a lot guilt, shame, fear, disconnection, kind of the opposite of what we are taught sex inside of marriage is quote unquote supposed to be. And so that plays into kind of even the research that we're seeing. And many women in particular, are just experiencing an enormous amount of sexual pain, sexual fear. It's I mean, unbelievable. I did it's not an official research study. I did an in-depth interview for my next book, or a survey where like 350 people responded, and it was all about things like purity culture, diet culture, things like that. And then I did some in-depth interviews with about 10 of those people, and all of them coming out of purity culture. It didn't matter if they grew up in Church of Christ or Mormonism or Jehovah's Witness or Seventh-day Adventist. Like the amount of sexual dysfunction that they experienced as a result of purity culture was like across the board. Like everybody, and still to this day, many of them are dealing with issues from it.
Yeah, what's coming up for me too is I think about the developmental trauma lens of that, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
messages 0 to 18 years old when we're still developing obviously, and then how our primary caregivers respond to
Yes.
that distress, which a
Mhm.
lot of times they're reinforcing it by one even just not talking about it, right?
Right.
Or
Right.
saying that's
Mhm.
something you don't do. And it is like a more complex thing that gets stuck in the nervous system
Mhm.
that requires a body-based approach to work
Yeah.
through.
Yeah, absolutely. Because when we talk about that light switch, right? So
Yeah.
technically, cognitively, we can tell ourselves it's okay, right? I've signed the legal document, I've gone before the priest, I've gone before God's people, I've said the words. So in my mind, it's right. But our bodies don't operate necessarily off of what our brain is telling us. Sometimes it does, but typically this it's all a physiological process, and our bodies don't respond to, oh, just because I believe something different, now my physiological experience is going to also follow suit. It takes a lot of time to resolve how those messages live in our bodies in order for our body to be able to then have a different experience. Which is, and some, I should say, there are some people where and I won. And I still don't know to this day how this happened. I was so deep in purity culture. I didn't have my first kiss until I was like 2 months shy of 30, and I wasn't married. Right. And so I, like, in that moment, like, should have felt all the guilt, the shame, the pain, whatever. I don't know to this day
Yeah.
why I had a different embodied experience, because I certainly did not hold lightly to those beliefs. but I would say I'm the exception, not the
Yes.
norm. So I want to just say, like, there are many people where that is the experience, where they're like, nope, no guilt, no shame, or I felt guilty for not feeling guilty. But there's many, many more people that do have a much more disruptive experience, like in their
Yeah.
bodies, that are like, no, like this. I know consciously that it's okay, but my body is having a big resistance to this, or even straight up pain
Yeah,
to that.
absolutely. I mean, what's coming up for me that I thought this when you first said it. I'm like, I wonder if it was because your brain was fully developed when
I mean, maybe.
you know,
Yeah.
like that's what was coming up for me because so many times I think this is happening when our
Hmm.
brain is not fully developed. I mean, I would say
Right.
even for myself personally as an
Hmm.
adolescent,
Hmm.
when those things were coming online because
Yeah.
of puberty and I was making choices and decisions that went against what I was being
Hmm.
taught, that was very disruptive and
True. True.
dysregulating for my
Yeah.
nervous system.
Hmm.
And then a lot of, I mean, most LDS folks get married very young, so
Right.
much
Hmm.
before their brain is fully developed, and so I'm just
Hmm.
curious about that. I get curious about
Yeah,
everything.
that would be interesting to do some research around that, because I mean, we know obviously like 15 to 25, our brains are moving towards like solidifying in terms of being fully developed. But I mean, that's why so many cults, high control religion, propaganda groups, everything really targets that age range with their messaging, purity culture included, because they know if they can get you during that time, the likelihood that will then be who you are, and you will replicate that and teach others to do it, is so much greater. It's wild, and there have
Yeah.
been studies done around that, so
Yeah, I
it's
mean,
like
I feel like I can just keep asking you
yeah.
question after question because I feel I I think about this all of the time. I feel like high control groups and obviously Mormonism because that's like what I grew up around and what
Hmm.
is in the culture I now serve, but it
Hmm.
is and I don't even like to use the word pray because I don't know if that's like their intention, but it's so
Yeah.
interesting how they are seeking out communities of people that
Hmm.
seem more marginalized or have trauma or
Right.
distress, or there are a
Hmm.
lot of adolescents who get converted,
Hmm.
right? In
Hmm.
in
Yeah.
in their and a lot of times they'll target the children versus the parents,
Right. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know? And so it's really just fascinating how all of that works, but
Hmm.
it makes a lot of sense because if
Yeah.
you're a vulnerable population and we're promising goodness, we're promising
Right.
love and family and
Hmm.
connection, we all want
Yeah.
that.
Right. And I think, I don't know that every single leader of every church or every elder or every pastor or clergy member would like consciously know this, but like as humans, we do have basic needs beyond food, water, shelter. Like, yes, that's a basic need, but we also have basic needs for connection, identity, purpose, belonging, things like that. And religious institutions understand that. Like I said, maybe they can't like totally articulate it, but they understand that. And I think it's worth noting that there are a lot of religions that are able to provide things for people in need that simply are not provided by the community or by other institutions and entities. And so you might have a young single mom who is in need of basic things, right? Just like material things, who is in need of childcare, who is in need of support. And many religious institutions go, we have something for that. Yeah, we can do a mom's day out. We can do, here's like our own food pantry, our own nursery that you can, kind of take things from. Or it might be people that are sick or disabled or elderly or on the fringes or dealing with abuse and trauma and, not coping well and things like that. And so they're providing for them very basic needs. And that's not to say that they're the only place that could do it, because certainly we can find that other places. But I will say, like, churches provide that like at a one stop shop, like they just do. And there
Mhm.
is something there that then they go, oh, well, if they gave me this, they stepped in, they supported me, they, helped me. Like maybe I need to kind of look into this. Like seems like pretty good. So I don't want to dismiss like the very real positive work that many religious institutions can do. But they're also not unique. I think that's what I want people to know, is that like they don't have the corner market on like, oh, we do this for humans and that's something special about us. There's many other places that could do it, but I think what is unique is it's a one-stop shop, multiple generations, multiple backgrounds, multiple socioeconomic statuses, all in one place. So I think that is part of an important part of the conversation too.
Absolutely. And what's coming up for me too is that generational element to
Yes.
it, right? And
Yeah.
I specifically think about that a lot with Mormonism. We're
Mhm.
talking about, you know, they crossed the plains to Utah. They experienced
Yes.
horrific trauma. And the only
Mhm.
way, in my opinion, to survive that was to like come together
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
uniform as a community. And then here we are, you know,
Mhm.
present day, still seeing a lot of that rigidity and control being exerted. It's just
Mhm.
painted a little bit differently in the here and now,
Mhm.
but it has that generational aspect
Yeah.
of this is just what we've always
Mhm.
done.
Yeah.
So why
Well,
would we look elsewhere, you know?
right. And even beyond that, when we look to just like the origin of humanity, like
Mhm.
we are very tribalistic people for survival, right? Like we needed to be with groups of people for survival. But it's, we've evolved beyond certain things, right? We don't need to travel around in packs of people anymore, in more of a nomadic lifestyle. But it doesn't take away from that need to be uh, have belonging and community and a sense of connection. We're just doing it with other things now, right? And so, but it is still tapping into those basic survival needs that we have, and I mean, in one way that's like really beautiful, and in other
Mhm.
ways it's like really terrifying because of the methods and mechanisms they're using to do it.
Absolutely. It's like tapping into that like again, like where we're at on a human level
Yeah.
in a way that we don't necessarily need anymore to that degree of control, right?
Mhm. Mhm. Yes,
Wow.
that's a great way of saying it. Yeah.
No, I mean, this conversation, I think, like already so much rich information for people listening. And I think really validating too, because what you're talking about and what we're speaking on is why it is so hard to step away, why it
Mhm.
is so hard when
Yeah.
you're in it to see it for what it is, to see some of the
Mhm.
harmful things. And I say this all the time, and it's because it's not all bad. It's not all
Right.
abusive,
Yeah.
right? There are
Mhm.
these really beautiful, supportive, loving parts,
Mhm.
and it's hard to see the things that are
Yeah.
actually harmful, you know?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
always hold space for that for so many people
Mhm.
because they have a lot of they feel a lot of ways towards themselves, like anger and frustration towards
Yeah.
themselves. And I
Mhm.
often say when you were in it, like you it was an adaptation to not see it. Like it was a way to
Mhm.
stay safe
Mhm.
because the
Yeah.
alternative was too distressful. And I think for a lot of
Right.
these reasons.
Yeah, and a couple of things with that is many people inside high control religions grew up in it. So there was never a conceptualization of life outside of that. I have zero memories of like not being a part of a religious institution from the moment I was born. In fact, I know I was 3 days old the first time that I went to church. Like, or not, maybe it was 5 days old. So 3 to 5 days old,
Yes.
right? There is never a time in my life. So there is like, I think it's important to recognize, because people do say that, like, why didn't I see it or whatnot? When this is a system you've grown up in, like how would you know it's any different? And that's every human, right? We all grow up in our individual families and cultures and things like that. We're like, oh, this is how life is. And it's not until you're in relation with other humans that you're like, wait, like crunchy peanut butter exists. I thought it was only creamy because that's what we had, right? So it's
Yeah.
like there is something to that, but I think it's also important to understand, like, when we're talking about high control environments, whether that is with a religion or with a relationship or anything else, we're talking about something that is it like it doesn't just okay, for instance, if you were I use this with like domestic violence relationships. If you went on a first date with somebody and they start screaming at the server, they flip the table over, they punch somebody and run out of the restaurant, you're not going on a second date with them. You're like, "Whoa," right? But that's typically not how abusive
Mm-mm.
relationships work. It starts with love bombing. It starts in a very kind of normal way, maybe swept up, maybe this is the person you've always been waiting for, the knight in shining armor or this amazing person, right? And over time, little things start to happen, little things that are easy to write off, little things that are easy to justify. Nobody's perfect. Oh, it was a bad day. Yep, I really was nagging that person. But what happens is they do these little things, like maybe giving you like a like saying something kind of snarky or mean that isn't like outright or overtly mean, but kind of is, and they wait to see how do you respond to that. And if they know like you're not going to push back on that, you're going to be able to write it off, then they can take another step further. And that's how the abuse cycle starts, is these little tiny steps towards a little bit more abuse, a little bit more control, a little bit more domination. And the same thing happens inside of high control religions. So if you are somebody who's either entering into that space, or for most teenagers where they're having to make like a proclamation of like, now it's my faith, it's not just my parents' faith, there is this period of time where it's like, we're bringing you in, we're accepting you, we're celebrating, you're part of this community. And then over time, we have these like little things. Well, hey, you know what? Your bra strap was showing. You really can't do that. Or we've noticed that you haven't given us your tithes in quite a while. Or you know what? Brother this or sister this said this about your, personal walk with God, or you're not reading these books or whatever. And slowly but surely, we're kind of like taking little bits and little bits and little bits. And it doesn't seem weird, because it's not like you're coming into their church and they're saying, you must give us this percent of your income, and you can't wear this, and you must wear this, and you can't listen to this, and you can't hang out with these people. If that was the case, nobody would come back, right? It's this
Absolutely.
slow thing that happens over time. And so for people that can, like, who are in it, I think helping conceptualize can be really helpful, because it's not that you just didn't see it or you weren't intelligent and couldn't pick things out. It's that this system was set up to make sure that you couldn't see it, and you can't really like put your finger on, oh, wait, it was that, like, oh, but that's not that bad. It's set up to do that. It's set up to mess with your mind. So I feel like it's important to say that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really helpful insight. Like, the system was set up. One thing I've been
Mhm.
thinking about a lot, which is what's coming up for me, is how religion, like what makes part of the deconstruction so difficult is that the religion creates the trauma, but it also creates the
The
solution.
solution, yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
like this push and pull, right? For all of
Mhm.
those reasons.
Mhm.
And it's like, it creates the trauma and distress around purity culture, but then it creates the solution through repentance, which then creates more trauma. And it's just,
Mhm.
it's never ending. But I think that's
Yeah.
why it's also so difficult to deconstruct,
Mhm.
because it's created this distress around
Mhm.
believing in the afterlife and knowing that for certain that you're going to be saved, and that's
Mhm.
distressing, but you have to
Yes.
stay. It's so complex.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, it is. They create a lot of problems that they have the solution for.
Yeah. Which is, see, it's designed that way. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
gonna jump into these submissions, or I'm
Okay.
never gonna stop talking to
That's
you.
okay.
Thank you so much for all of your knowledge. It's like, I
No,
really just
no
thank you for
problem. I'm
being
so
here.
glad. Yeah, I'm so glad to be here.
All right, let's jump in. So, first submission.
Mhm.
My identity and personality hardly revolves around Mormonism anymore. However, I'm a college student and moved back home for summers, where I live with my TBM family, true believing Mormon family. Because of that, I have to think about Mormonism much more than I like to.
Mhm.
I feel like I am stuck in it when I have been so ready to
Mm.
be out for so long. Any
Yeah.
advice?
Yeah, that's a really hard situation. I think a lot of people go through similar things. Maybe it's not such a large chunk of time, like 3 months in the summer, but going home for, holidays, or, family vacations or things like that, where you're stuck inside of this environment where you have to like kind of put on a mask a little bit of like, oh yeah, I'm still in it and whatnot. And that feels really hard, right? Because I think so much of deconstructing is starting to also build this authentic sense of self. So to feel like you have to go back in to an environment where you then have to put that mask back on is literally like physically and emotionally exhausting, and can take a huge toll. So I want to just like validate that that is a very difficult experience, whether that's for one day or a year or however long you have to. So in this case, like when you're in these environments having to kind of put that mask on, I would always encourage people, like, what are ways that you can have some touch points like outside of that. So are there places that you can go? Are there people you can spend time with? Are there headphones you can wear to listen to different music, or just some little things where you go, hey, I'm still kind of asserting my autonomy in these ways. And maybe it's kind of even deciding like, there's certain conversations that I'm going to just remain silent. I'm not going to add my 2 cents in, because I don't want to have to get into these conversations or spend my energy trying to explain myself. But I think that, everybody's going to be a little bit different, when you have a true believing family, of whether it's within Mormonism or any, like, this is their identity, right? This is the core of who they are. So challenging it isn't usually going to feel very safe. And even having conversations, like good faith conversations of wanting to explain where you're at, many family members just simply cannot. So I would, like, if at all possible, like, give yourself permission to not have to go there, but look for small ways where you can kind of like come up for air, where you don't have to wear that mask, so much. Again, maybe it's just, well, I know there's not as many like coffee shops in Utah, but like maybe it's going to a library or a park or a soda shop or something like that. And just like giving yourself breaks, or having your friends that you can touch base with, have a code word, that's like, hey, if I text you this, like, please call me, and, state a quote unquote emergency, so that I have to like get out of the house and go talk about something different. That's kind of probably where I'd start.
Yeah, I really love that. I really loved what you said about finding little moments of autonomy,
Yeah.
because I think that's essentially, right, this person's moved away from college and they're getting that.
Yeah.
They're like creating their own identity, which is incredible. And
Mhm.
so how can you bring pieces of that when you
Mhm.
go home in this environment, and making it about you versus about them, and needing
Yeah.
them to be different, but can you find little ways to hold on to that, and what
Mhm.
and all of the examples Laura just shared, but
Mhm.
I loved that little nugget about letting it be about your own autonomy, and
Yeah.
celebrating and maybe bringing some of the things you've created since going away to college, and
Mhm.
allowing them to show up in a way that feels safe and supportive in your home environment, and maybe that is outside of it. And I do think more coffee shops are coming here in Utah,
Oh, that's kind of fun.
especially up north. But I would say even like where I live, coffee is pretty popular.
Ooh,
So
you
there's
guys
hope.
are
There's hope.
progressing. I love it.
We're
I will say
progressing.
I do want to go to a soda shop. Like, I've only been to Salt Lake City a couple times. One of my very, very dearest friends lives there. And I never went to a soda shop. So I was like, okay, I am gonna need to do this because it just looks fabulous.
There are so many sodas. I live in a pretty small town in Utah, and there's a lot of
Hmm.
soda shops here. But I will say that's one thing I personally never ever
Really?
really
Yeah.
got into. Because
Hmm.
in high school, which when I was still a member, I was a member till I was about 20 years old. But I
Hmm.
didn't drink soda because I played sports. But it's
Ah,
so
yeah.
funny how many people start their morning with a Diet Coke. It's
Yeah,
so
I mean,
fascinating.
I'm one of them. So I'm like, I would have fit into the Mormon culture just fine. I really don't drink very much. I don't do coffee really anymore. And so Diet Coke is like, so yeah, it was in my bones.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
you need to do the soda shop. I love that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's jump into the next submission. I really liked this one.
Hmm.
How do I explain how religion hurt me and why we
Hmm.
don't participate to my kids? We live
Oh,
in a
yeah.
really Catholic area, and my daughter asks to go to church sometimes and asks if it's okay if she believes in God. Of course, I said she can believe whatever she chooses, and then I discussed
Hmm.
briefly why we won't be going to church. Kids are 10,
Hmm.
8, and 6 for reference. Their
Hmm.
dad takes them to LDS church with him when they are with him for the summer. I feel like I cannot be objective about it.
Sure. I mean, that makes so much sense. And I just want to affirm that that's a really difficult position. And I think that there's a lot of people, I have a lot of friends who have young children, and that's a huge thing. How do I address this with my kids? It is so much easier to have a very clear cut answer of like, oh, this is what we believe, right? And part of the perk to a religion or any high control environment is that there is so much clarity of this is what we believe, this is what we don't. And that gives us a sense, or at least the illusion of safety within our nervous systems. So, of course, it feels disconcerting. And, my biggest piece of advice is to be honest and open with your kids. obviously, for what is developmentally appropriate. So, you're not going to tell your 6-year-old all the deep, dark secrets of what theology means to you and why this doesn't, fit for you or whatever it is. But, you can say things like, I really struggled to know what I thought about this, or this was a situation that made me feel really sad or really scared. And I don't want to do that anymore. I think being honest with your kids is going to be what's best, because I think there's a lot of people inside of high control religions, regardless of the actual religion, that have a lot of resentment and frustration at their parents for not being open. Like they would have rather had their parents say, I don't know, or I'm really scared about this too, or this is really confusing. Instead of that, they just said, the Bible says this, or God says this, or the pastor says this, or the church says, right? And so the more you can just be open, and even as your kids get older too, saying like, let's explore this together. Let's figure it out. I don't know the answer to this, or this feels really heavy to me. I think that does wonders for building a safe connection. But it also then gives your kids, permission to explore themselves. And, and you can always say, I mean, this isn't always the best answer, but you can always acknowledge, if one of the kids is like, why don't you come, to a service with us, and to say, you know what, I will tell you about that, but I'm going to wait until you're a little bit older so that you can understand some of the reasons. But for now, I can tell you X, Y, or Z, whatever you feel comfortable with. I think it's okay to also say that sometimes, because sometimes things aren't developmentally appropriate for children to hear, right? All the ins and outs of everything. But I think leaving it open that they can ask those questions is very helpful. And a lot of times we might also assume that they have questions that they don't have. So as long as the door is open, that they have questions and they know that they can come to you at any point. There may be a lot of questions that you think they'll ask that they actually won't, because they're like, it doesn't matter, right?
Absolutely. That's it. My response is the same, as to be open and honest.
Yeah.
And excuse me, I think, do you know who Dr. Becky is?
Yeah,
Dr.
I love her.
I love
Yeah.
her, and I think about her all the time, and just having open, honest, real conversations with our kids that are obviously
Yes.
age appropriate and I love how she always, and I've been really working, because I have a 6 and a 3.5-year-old, so I've been working on a lot of this stuff in language with them, but I always say, like, thank you so much for telling me that, and going from there. But just like you said, oftentimes I think they're going to have all these questions, and then we move on from the conversation so quickly, no matter what it is. And also to this person, I've thought of this I think about this quite a bit, about how am I going to talk to my kids about Mormonism specifically, because we live in a very predominant Mormon culture, and they are going to be surrounded by it. My oldest is in kindergarten right now, and he hasn't brought it home. He hasn't brought it back to talk about it yet. And I don't necessarily have the answer right now, because I think it's going to be in the moment developmentally appropriate for him. When he asks, like, oh, how come we don't go to this church? Or what is that big building? Like, what is it about? But I do think just being honest with him about why we aren't attending, and I think what it comes up for me is, what are our beliefs as a family? What are our values in our home? What do we do? How do we spend our time? How does that look different than maybe what religion would ask of us, and things like that. And I think one thing that comes up for me that I think is a hard thing as a parent is death, and talking about death and dying, especially when you grow up in a high control religion, right? It's talked about in a very different way. And I think there is a lot of underlying fear that comes with that, because I don't think religious language a lot of times is developmentally appropriate for children.
Right.
And I think
it's set up to bypass everything as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we have had very real conversations about death and dying in my home. So several years ago, I had a nanny whose son was killed, and obviously it was very tragic, but my oldest knew him. He was old enough to know him and understand the concept of death. And we just had an honest conversation about, obviously age appropriate. He was like 3 at the time, 3 or 4 at the time, but he was in an accident. He had to go to the hospital. He didn't make it. And he, for a while, would ask me, he would say, Mom, where did Will die? And that was the son's name. And I would show him, because with Cedar's so small, we drive by the hospital every day, like that hospital. And I just kept having conversations with him about it in a way that he wanted to have it. and my brother's dog passed away. And so then we had to
Mm,
talk about the dog passing away and where did the dog
yeah.
go to die? And again, just normalizing it. I didn't say he went to heaven. I don't know where he went, whatever,
Mhm.
just talking about it
Yeah.
real. And then recently my mom's dog died. We clearly have lots of dogs in my family. And then my youngest is now understands what death is too, and it's just very matter of the fact. They're
Mhm.
not scared,
Mhm.
they're not worried about it,
Yeah.
and we move on from it, you
Yes.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's when we, like, put these, like, we don't talk about that or, whatever.
Yes.
That's where then some of the shame starts to develop, the silence, the secrecy, oh, if we can't talk about this, then it might mean there's something bad, there's something wrong, and we get a lot more fear. And the moment we just open it up, it's like if you say you can't have chocolate cake, then all you're gonna want is chocolate cake. But if you're like, yeah, you can have it if you want, and somebody's like, okay, it's like, well, then I might want it or I might not, but
Yep.
like it literally doesn't matter, right? And so the intensity, the fixation of it goes away, the shame goes away, and you're able to just like make a choice, like, okay, like, yeah, I don't really want to talk about this anymore. So I'm gonna stop asking questions about death today. Like maybe tomorrow I will, but like I'm okay right now. It takes away kind of the charge behind it.
Absolutely, and there's no sorry, excuse me. It's not ambiguous. Can't get my
Yes.
words out. So my mom isn't like was raised Mormon. She's not active,
Mhm.
not practicing. But she started to say Zeus is in heaven, and I was like, "Mom, we don't my kids don't know what
Yeah.
heaven means." And I was
Yeah.
like, "And then how am I going to even like how would I even explain that to them?" And that's so ambiguous
Mhm.
and uncertain, and like they are not going to even that's not even real, maybe,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But what is real is that he died and she has his ashes
Yeah.
in a box in her
Yeah.
pantry. So
Mhm.
they want to go see Grammy's, like they want to go see where Zeus is. And then they see, and then we move on. And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
versus like this afterlife that nobody knows
Mhm.
what it looks like or sees and can't explain it. It's not tangible for a child.
Yes. Right. Right. Yeah. And it's okay too. That I have a couple of friends also like similar age children, and they'll say, well, some people believe this, right? So if they come to
Yes.
them with like a religious concept, because here in the South, everybody is, it's just baked into the culture. But so their kids will say, like, why don't we go to church? Why don't this or that? And she'll say, some people believe this or that, I kind of believe this over here. What do you think? Right. So you're already starting to help them then develop critical thinking, which is
Ooh,
another skill that many people inside of high control religion did not have the luxury to be able to learn and practice. So you're just kind of giving them these options. So again, it's not off the table, but it's just saying, like, here's what some people believe, here's what some people do, here's what I've decided to do. What do you think? What do you want to do? And
yeah.
so like that, I mean,
I love
again,
that.
it like decreases the intensity around it, and a kid might be like, yeah, I'm going to stay with you, I'm not going to go to that church service, or I'm going to, I want to try it out, and then ask, they get back, what did you think of it? What did you like? What did you not like? Do you have any questions from it? Is there anything that was confusing? So you're like really just embracing whatever it is, and so that they're able to start to develop their own critical thinking skills.
Absolutely, and what I love about that too is, like, the curiosity
Yes.
nature,
Yeah.
right? Because
Mhm.
I think a lot of times high control groups don't want us curious, they don't want us asking
Right.
questions, they don't want us exploring things, and so as parents
Mhm.
and I would just even say outside of high control religion, I think one of the greatest gifts we can teach our kids is curiosity and being
Yeah.
open, right? And that's what
Mhm.
was coming up for me as you were sharing those
Yeah. Oh,
questions,
I
so
love that. Yeah.
I love this. I love this
Yeah.
conversation. Okay, we have to keep moving, so we have too many
Mhm.
submissions. I keep silently watching my spouse listen to conference talks, reading scriptures,
Mhm.
and going to church when I know all of it is bullshit and harmful. I want to shake him. I so
Mhm.
desperately want to be on the same page. It hurts me that he believes that we can't be a forever family because of my faith expansion.
Mhm.
Why can't I live a true why can't sorry, why can't I live a life true to my values without it hurting the people I care about the most? Mm,
That is so hard. I think one of the hardest things about deconstructing is when you're in a relationship with somebody and they either aren't kind of at the same pace as you or are just going like, "Hey, that's actually not for me," right? Because you're recognizing like, "Hey, the reasons that we even started this partnership are maybe no longer important to me." And so I'm wanting to figure out how to do a relationship where church or God or this community or these, theological beliefs or, whatever aren't the center of who we are. So I just want to validate, like, that's an unfortunately really common but
Mhm.
really difficult experience. And yeah, like, as I'm listening to the question, there's a couple things of going like, hey, one of the things that is so cool about deconstruction is like starting to let go of some of those fundamentalist beliefs of like, you have to believe this, you cannot believe that, or it's very black and white, rigid, binary thinking and acting. And as we deconstruct, hopefully we're deconstructing that as well and seeing where else that might show up in our lives. And sometimes that shows up then in our relationships, even in our most important relationships, where it's like, you must be on the same page as me in order to like have this fulfilling relationship or family or life that we think. And I do understand that it is really hard when, especially when we're talking about like the forever family, it's really hard to have this conceptualization that my partner doesn't think that I'm going to be a part of that. That's a huge area of grief. And I certainly would not want to downplay that. And I think it would be important to really work through that process of grief. But oftentimes it's through learning how to like disembody fundamentalism in your own life and live from your own values, and become, kind of true to yourself, that other people do start to see that and might also ask questions, which feels like backwards missionary work or something like that.
Yes, for sure. But I'm with you.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
tracking. I'm on the same
Mhm.
page here.
But I think about like how, when I was inside religion, you're supposed to turn every conversation that you have with any person like back to God, back to something spiritual, trying to get them to convert, whatever it is. And so your kindness was fake. Your interest in somebody was fake because it was always this greater purpose of like, how are you going to get them connected to your faith? And so being out of that and me like letting go of like, I need you to believe like me in order for me to be okay, then I can show up as my kind self. And it's amazing like how many people are like, wow, like I actually believe you care about me. There's not a hidden motive behind it. You're just showing up as a kind person. You're showing up as a supportive person. And so by me working on that in myself and being able to really let go of this idea of like, I need everybody around me to see things the way that I see in order for me to feel okay, in order for me to feel safe in this situation. That was me doing my own work around fundamentalism. And then as it turns out, people were like, oh, I actually then like being around her. I actually might be more curious and have more conversations because I don't feel like if I disagree, they're going to judge me. So obviously it's more complex because it is your family, it's your partner. So I don't want to just like glaze over that piece, but just kind of on like a 30,000-foot view, that's kind of what comes to mind.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, right? Because what you're talking about is regulating your own
Mm,
nervous
yes.
system. And I feel
Yeah.
I feel that very similarly to myself.
Mhm.
And as I have dove into my own inner work and my own healing and found more regulation in my nervous system,
Yeah.
environments that were previously very activating to me
Mhm. Yeah.
are not that anymore. Like
Mhm.
even so this is so it's not really related to high control religion, but it's really pertinent to this conversation. My parents are divorced. My dad had an affair, so it's really
Mm.
complex, right? So it's been a rough 3 years. And
Mm.
last night was my niece's birthday, and I knew my dad and his former mistress, now girlfriend, were going to be there. And previously, I couldn't attend. I couldn't show up, right, for my
Right.
own
Right.
dysregulation.
Mhm.
But when my sister-in-law messaged about it, I was like, "Yeah, we'll be there." And I went,
Mm.
and I was there, and I was grounded in my own being, and
Yeah.
I showed up, and my kids had the most incredible time.
Oh.
And that I like, okay, I can do hard things. I can be in an
Mhm.
environment that was previously activating to me, and my dad is the same. He's always been, and I don't know
Yeah.
if he'll change, right? But I can
Right.
shift. I can shift
Yeah.
and I can show
Mhm.
up differently in that environment.
Mhm.
And that was also what was coming up for me too in this submission is like he believes that we can't be a forever family. But do you
Mm.
believe that, right? And I think
Yes.
if there's grief coming up there, you might still be working through that. That's a lot to
Mhm.
deconstruct. And so
Of
doing your
course.
own nervous system work around that and you finding that knowing of yes, you can
Mhm.
have a forever family
Mhm.
regardless if you prescribe to this religion or not. And even if
Yeah.
your partner still does, I do believe that you can feel more regulation around that.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
think exactly what Laura was saying is as you heal and you feel more regulated, you show up in the environment differently, and that impacts your partner's brain on a neurophysiological
Yes.
level, right?
Mhm.
It's not the same as when they're like little tiny kids, but he still receives
Mhm.
and he is still shaped by the environment and
Mhm.
how you interact and how you show up with him. And
Mhm.
when you can just show up open and curious and loving, even if he doesn't agree with you, that does
Mhm.
have an impact. And I also want to validate that this is a very hard to do. I'm gonna just
Yeah.
own that
Yes.
it took
Mhm.
me through three almost 4 years to show up at
Yeah.
a party where
Yeah.
my dad and his mistress were going to be there. Like, and that
Mhm.
was a lot of work
Yes.
on my own.
Yes.
So this isn't
Yeah.
an overnight process.
Right. Yeah.
But I've really kind of, I mean, and you probably know this, or like family estrangement or ending
Mhm.
relationships is very popular right now.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
don't know if that's always in our best interest. I think in some
Yeah.
situations that absolutely is,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
I want people to know that they can get to a place within their own being where they can still maintain these close family relationships in a way that is
Yeah.
supportive to their nervous system.
Yeah. And I think the key, I mean, not that it's a super simple answer, but it's recognizing that, you know, I think inside of religious institutions, there's this idea that because we have the same faith beliefs, we serve the same God, we kind of have these built in values, like that's the foundation of our relationship. And oftentimes then that like negates or bypasses many other foundational aspects of relationships, learning, how to communicate, learning about attachment styles, learning about how to repair relationships. And so when we're coming out of that, we're kind of learning all of that, but we can actually use that then with our family, with our friends that are still in those environments. And it's going like, hey, how do I develop a relationship with somebody where we don't have this one thing in common, but gosh, we still love to go biking and we still love this reality TV show and we still love Mexican food, and like, could we still like really kind of focus on the things that we have in common or find things that we have in common? I think especially in marriages where we go, hey, like these principles that we got married on are not necessarily what are important to me, but gosh, I really love you and I love the time we have together. So what if we kind of say like, okay, so we don't have this one thing in common, but we have like 50 other things in common. What would it be like to really focus on that, and build the relationship up in those ways instead of focusing on this one thing that we don't seem to agree with right now?
Yeah, I really love that too, because in a lot of ways it allows you to respect the disagreement,
Yes.
right? Like
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
you take care of you, your partner's taking care of them, and then you focus your time and energy to where you already are
Mhm.
agreeing, you already are
Yeah.
aligned. I think that's a really
Yeah.
tangible way to put
Mhm.
that into practice.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, next submission. This is a little bit of a long one, but I feel like it's important.
Mhm.
And this was wrote directly to you too, which was really sweet.
Oh, that's so sweet.
When religion hurts you was truly life-changing. Thank you for
Mhm.
writing it. I love to know your thoughts on pornography in relation to purity culture. As Mormons, we are taught that viewing pornography is an extreme sin. Viewing
Mhm.
pornography as a teenage girl perpetrated a shame in me that I still deal with. I was convinced that because I was a girl watching porn that there was something wrong with me. Even though I've deconstructed parts of purity culture and understand that self-pleasure isn't inherently bad or sinful, the shame that comes up surrounding porn is still very present in my life. I know this is a tricky and complex subject, but I would love to know your general thoughts on this topic.
Oh, well, thank you, first of all, for sharing that because I can imagine there's a lot of emotion even just in sharing it. Though I did not grow up in the Mormon church, I know like everything you're talking about is like, oh yeah, check, check, check. Like I know that too in terms of like that's, I mean, pornography in women, it was like, no way. Like women aren't sexual, right? They don't
No
masturbate,
way,
they don't
they're
watch
not watching
porn.
it.
Like, yeah, like, right. So and sometimes they didn't even say that. It was just implied, right? Because sex is for men and women are obligated to give that, right? So you're kind of like, oh, so then okay, yeah, this isn't for me. I shouldn't struggle with this because this is a guy thing or something. And so which obviously so much shame. This we talked about this a little bit earlier, is like religion is like really good at creating problems that they have the solutions for, and this is one of them. Like I cannot tell you the amount of people that I have had like conversations with where I'm like, hey, you watching porn once or 10 times or occasionally or what, like that's not what constitutes an addiction. So in many religious environments, you watch porn once and now you're an addict, right? In that role. Using that analogy too of like the cake, right? If I say chocolate cake is bad, you can't have it. That's all you're going to want. Our human physiology is designed in a survival capacity. So if I know that there's this thing that's about to be in lack, then my survival physiology goes, I need this, right? I have to get it, right? It's essential for my survival, right? So if I say, like, here's this bad thing, it's off limits, right? My body, my biology is saying, then I have to have that. Well, then that thing is wrong. And so then the shame kicks in, but then there still is this lack. So it's like this cycle that continues to go over and over and over. But if we neutralize it and we say, hey, chocolate cake, you take it or leave it. There's also vanilla cake, there's red velvet, there's birthday confetti cake, whatever. Have whatever you want, or have no cake at all, have a cookie, whatever. All of a sudden, then that chocolate cake, there becomes more choice. Do I want that? Do I want to interact with it? Do I even like it? We have a lot more questions. We have a lot more curiosity, a lot more choice. And so obviously I know that's, I'm not totally comparing porn to chocolate cake, but the concept is the same.
Yes, absolutely.
Right? So when we say like porn is off limits, it's this bad, dirty, disgusting, vile, evil thing. Our physiology is saying we have to have it, right? Then there's shame. But if we were to say porn is out there, it's available, you could use it, you could not use it. Let's talk about what the benefits are. Let's talk about why it might not be beneficial. Let's talk about what happens in your brain and body. Is that what you want? Like, what
Yes.
is the choice? But when then you have a choice of how you want to interact with it, you go, you know what? Today it's a yes for me. But maybe tomorrow, no, I don't really need it. I don't want it. It doesn't feel like it's something that would be helpful, beneficial, whatever it is. But then that's coming from you, whether it's a yes or no, and we are decreasing the shame that's connected with it. So I think that, just on a general level, that to me was really helpful to start understanding that. But I think also for women in particular, any aspect of your sexuality, whether it's masturbation or, watching porn, like it adds another layer onto that. And so in terms of like advice or like how do you work with that, I use a lot of like internal family systems, inner child combined with somatic experiencing, and I think working with that inner teenager part of yourself to start to help her realize that this is not bad. This is actually very developmentally quite normal. How incredible that your body kind of like knew like where it
Mm.
was at, even though we had all this other messaging that was going on. Your body was doing exactly what it was developmentally supposed to be doing. Giving her the nurture, the guidance, the comfort that you should have been able to receive, but were not because of the contextual factors. I think all of that can be really helpful as well. I feel like I'm missing parts of the question, but I'll pause there. Yeah.
No, I think that was a wonderful answer. It was in it it's the shame comes up for me,
Yeah.
and you're right, it was like the most perfect example of how the religion creates the trauma and then
Yeah.
the
The solution.
solution for it.
Mhm.
But how when I think about addiction too, in any addiction, often what is the like undercurrent is shame,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much shame. And then when we have so much shame, we just stay in that cycle of addiction
Yeah.
because we hate ourselves. So then we watch porn and then we just keep
Mhm.
going around and round, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And I don't know. I like porn addiction is so high. I'm putting that in quotes in Utah, but I
Yeah.
don't really know if it's actually addiction or if it's a consequence of purity
I
culture
mean,
that has told
yeah.
you not to watch it, you know?
Right. There's a lot of research that talks about how you really can't be addicted to porn.
Yeah.
I don't know if I fully agree with it or not, but I think the one thing that I would agree with is that when we look at any sort of addiction, there's some like very specific factors that have to be in place. Things like, increased consumption, that it is impacting multiple areas of your life and finances and relationships, that it's impacting or impeding you from living whatever your normal life is, right? And so when we look at it from that example, could there be people that are addicted to porn? Yes, actually there can be. I dated somebody for quite some time where like they would spend 6 or 7 hours a day watching porn, and so because of that, they didn't have a job. They didn't have stable housing. They weren't able to maintain other relationships. Would that maybe fit in an addiction category? Sure, it potentially could, but even that, we'd have to look at some other factors. But when we're saying like, hey, sometimes I like porn because I just want to use it, and maybe it's once a
Yeah.
month or once a week or even on a daily basis or whatever, but it's not impacting these other factors. We go, I don't know then if it would necessarily fall into that addiction category. But I think that when we create this problem that any porn means that you are now beholden to this,
Yes.
video or this website or this whatever, it then again creates this like physiological response of not only shame, and shame operates in our body the same way that trauma does. It has a very, very similar imprint. And so then when that gets to be too much and we need to take the edge off of it, it's like we go and we indulge in that moment of like, I feel okay, which is usually the thing that's causing the shame, anyways. And so, yeah, it's just that cycle that they are creating. Even though, like it could be okay for you. And
Yeah.
honestly, like I know many people, I talk about this with many clients too. Like they're like, but I don't want to watch porn. It's like, okay, you certainly do not have to, but get clear then on what it is that you don't like about it. Is it because it's not ethically made? Is it because it's this or that? Great. Like you can choose to not watch porn for a myriad of very incredible reasons. Like that's totally fine. But that is coming from a choice that you're
Yes.
making. You're
Yes.
saying this is within my value system, or this is not within my value system to participate in that. And so I'm making it from that choice rather than because an entity or a higher power or, an elder said I could or couldn't participate.
Absolutely. And I think what you're also speaking to as well, or what's coming up for me, is when you do that inner work around it, the activation and the distress, whether that be through, I love internal family systems, somatic
Mhm.
experiencing, and that's essentially what we do in brain spotting is we
Right.
go into the
Yeah.
felt experience of it. Then
Mhm.
you do get those felt experiences, insights of the direction you want to go. Is it
Yeah.
something for you?
Mhm.
Is it not? And
Mhm.
I also think there's like a gendered component here, which we touched on, but
Mhm.
I was convinced that because I was a girl watching porn, there was something wrong
Mhm.
with me. And what comes up with me for me with that
Mm.
sentence is so many women in purity culture are told they're walking porn.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a great way
Especially,
to put it. Yeah, yeah.
like,
Mhm.
so I think, as a teenage girl consuming porn and you're receiving those types of messages
Yeah.
in
Yes.
some way,
Mhm.
that's another, like, you're going to have another reactive response to watching it.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. Because you're already trained to hate yourself, to, be disembodied, to feel like you are trash, you're evil, you're all of these things. So, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then to find pleasure or enjoyment in watching something that you are equally as disgusting, like on that same level, yeah, that would just increase the shame exponentially for sure.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And I think too, I loved what you talked about deciding, you making a decision about whether porn's for you versus religion
Mhm.
making a decision. And I think one way we do that is by
Mhm.
informing ourselves about what porn
Yeah.
is. And
Yeah.
there's lots of different things out there, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
we also have to get really clear that it's not real. It's a
Mhm. Right. Yes.
you
It
know?
yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and which there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying that
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that can't be something people consume, but just
Right.
informing ourselves in a lot of ways,
Yes.
asking a lot of questions, being really curious, really open, which I
Mhm.
think allows us to make a
Yeah.
decision about whether we want it in our life or
Yeah.
not. But
Yeah.
I also wanted to say I loved what you said too, like, it was developmentally appropriate for you to be curious about
Mhm.
sexual things at that age,
Mhm.
and that is your
Yes.
body was doing what it was designed to
Mhm.
do, and that is
Mhm.
really beautiful to look at it in that
Mhm.
lens.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the piece and that is where so much shame can come up, right? Not I mean, not only is it developmentally appropriate, but reminding yourself that women also sexually develop. Like contrary to what, purity culture teaches, like sex is not just for a man. Sexual development, sexual desire, sexual pleasure, being turned on, that's also not for a man. So it is perfectly normal to be curious, what is my body doing? Oh, look, there's another person doing this. Like that is intriguing. Like there's just like a sheer curiosity factor of like, what is happening? Okay, I want to see what this is, right? Oh my
Yes.
gosh, my body feels a certain way when I view this, right? There is just some natural exploration that goes with it. And I think when we like really kind of like reduce sex and sexuality to like this very specific way, again, then we have a lot of shame if it's anything outside of that. And so, yeah, just to reiterate, like that, it just feels very normal. It feels very appropriate. And that's where I think too, like when we use things like internal family systems, like going back and like being it, there's this concept called dual awareness where you realize, yes, I'm an adult in this moment, but I'm also kind of stepping back in with that teenage part of myself. So I'm keeping one foot in reality and one foot in the past here. And I'm coming along and being the big sister or the mentor or the auntie who that younger self needed to say like, hey, they're kind of full of shit here. Like this, like, let's talk about how we can do this in a safe way. Let's talk about how we can do this in a way that feels good to you. Let's talk about how they aren't right, when they talk about how the sex isn't for women or things like that. Or no, you're not walking pornography. Like being able to kind of reparent that younger teenage version of yourself, I feel like is so helpful. And just so you know, whenever we're working with like teenage parts, it always takes longer because teenagers know everything, right? And they can sniff you out. And so you just need to spend time showing up for that teenage part of yourself the same way you would have needed as a teenager, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes we just got to like show up for that part and say, I'm here until you feel secure enough to like take in what I'm saying.
Absolutely. It was funny right before you said it. I was thinking about it, but I was thinking about how so much of healing is learning to reparent
Yes.
ourselves,
Yes.
right?
So much. Yeah.
It's just like
Yes.
reparenting. And
Mhm.
I often say remothering for me, like,
Yeah.
like what did we need that we didn't get? And not
Yeah.
even because I mean, I believe that so many of our parents were showing up in the best way they knew how.
Right. Yeah.
It's like,
Mhm.
but they still messed up. They still
Yes. Mhm.
misstepped. And so how can we give that to ourselves
Mhm.
and reparent
Exactly.
ourselves? And it's a
Mhm.
journey for sure. I
It
love that
is. It
insight.
is.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dr. Laura Anderson, thank you so much for coming on here.
Oh, it's been so great.
I don't know if you can talk at all about the new book you're writing.
Yeah, I can give you little bits and pieces
Okay.
about it. So, yeah, so I'm exploring the intersections of purity culture, diet culture, and religious fundamentalism.
Okay.
And so, yeah, like I said, I did this really like comprehensive survey, and there were about 350 people participated in it. And then from that, I interviewed in depth. I think 10 or 12 people, and just going deeper into their experiences. And I did all of that kind of before I knew what the direction of the book was going to be. And so it is really about like the high standards that are placed on women, both in religion and culturally, to be thin, to be perfect, to be pure, and kind of exploring that and like the impact that it has on us.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't wait to read it. And it's gonna
I
that
know, me
is
neither. Yeah, I'm like, I hope I can actually like do justice to what I think I'm gonna write. Yeah.
I feel like it's so resonant though to so much of what we talked about today and
Mhm,
so much
mhm.
of the culture in which we live right now.
Yeah, yes, I
So
agree. I agree. So yeah, I'm excited. I've been kind of wrapping up some other projects so that once those are done, then the rest of the year I can really focus on getting the book done because it is due, next January. So yeah.
well, no, I'm sending you all the best for that. And
Thank you.
I thank you so much for coming on. I always kind of end the
Oh,
podcast this way. Is there any final words or any like
mm.
final thought you want to leave with us today?
Yeah, I mean, I love being able to be a part of this conversation, and I this sounds so cheesy, but, obviously I say it in my book, like religious trauma is trauma, but I think it's important to recognize that because I think so many of us come out of these situations and are like, oh, it really wasn't that bad. Or, can I really validate what happened to me? And so I just want to validate, like, yes, like it is trauma, but there also is support. There's also healing. There are people that are doing incredible work that you can reach out to, that you can follow on social media. You can listen to these podcasts, right? And to just know that you're worth it. Like you deserve that healing. And so even though it feels hard and murky at times, I just want to know that there is hope and there is support out there.
Thank you so much. And I will link
Yeah.
everything to connect you with Laura
Awesome.
in the podcast and the services she offers, as well as her
Mhm.
team. So thank you
Mhm.
guys for tuning in today. Until next time. Thank you for being a part of Sunflower Movement today. Just like sunflowers turn toward the light, may you keep leaning into growth, healing, and the spaces where you feel seen. If today's content resonates with you, please share, like, and review. It would mean the world to me.